Hello and welcome to my class on Asia Pacific Business Environment, Global Supply Chain Perspective. My name is Chung and I'll be your instructor. This class will provide an overview of the Asia Pacific business environment, covering things like the diversity within the area, why it is so important to the global supply chain, and what are the expected developments over the near and long term. This will really help you to understand the differences between the different countries in the Asia Pacific and prepare you for the other classes in this series, which will do a deeper dive into some of the phenomenons that's going on. So let's get started. Asia Pacific is often referred to as APAC, Asia Pacific. The acronym Asia Pacific doesn't have a real hard definition as to which countries are in Asia Pacific. You know, according to the World Bank or Asia Development Bank, there are various definitions for what is considered Asia Pacific. But if you look at the map on the screen, it shows generally the areas that we're covering is in the Southeast Asia area, China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, India, Vietnam, etc. So we're going to talk a bit about this region, and we'll highlight some of the key economies within this region that will have impact on the global supply chain. I guess one of the key learning outcomes we want from this class is that Asia is a very diverse region. A lot of people, when they think about Asia, they think of Asia as one whole region that is very homogeneous, where in effect it is very, very diverse. There's about 4 billion people, and it speaks about 2,300 languages within this region. And from the countries in this region, there's different forms of government. We have everything from communist rule to open democracies and everything in between. Different economic systems. We have centrally planned systems to capital systems, and again, everything in between. Different stages of human development, and that refers to education, healthcare. That really ties to the level of economic development, right? Some of the richer countries and some of the poorer countries will have very different conditions, demographics, and per capita income. Example here is that the range from Nepal, where it's about $849 US, ranging to like Singapore, which is the 57,000, over 57,000 a year per capita GDP. So you see the range. The range is a challenge, as well at the same time is considered a complementary, sometimes an advantage, because we have such a wide variety of different economies that if properly managed, it could be very complementary. So we will get into some of the dynamics of the intra-regional trade in our second class. But just to know that there is a huge difference from different countries in Asia. And as most people know, one of the Asia is really developing very quickly. In the past 30 years, you can see they probably started with post-war Japan, how it developed from into an industrial powerhouse. And then, then we have China, which developed since opening up in 1978, joining the WTO, and it's obviously it's been known as the world's factory manufacturing everything and exporting all over the world. A lot of things that we buy today, we'll see is made in China, but that is changing, and we'll discuss that. What is changing and why is changing. So Asia becoming more and more important from a global perspective. So that's what we want to do a little bit of a deep dive into Asia, provide the understanding for our students that work in global supply chain. This is the Asia Pacific region is home to some of the most populous countries. And I think most people know China is #1 in the world with a population about 1.44 billion people. And then India is #2. It's almost 1.4 billion people as well. And then we have Indonesia, which is 4th in the world, over 273 million people. That just those 3 countries combined accounts for over 40% of the world's population. So then you add up the rest of Asian countries, it's a huge population. Having such a large population, it is there are some advantages and also a lot of disadvantages and some challenges for the governments to deal with. But one item for supply chain that the population effect is that the population is also potential consumers. For example, in China, with the 1.44 billion people, that the population that is above a certain level of income are considered potential consumers, and they're consumer for all kind of things. That some of it could be high-end items imported from overseas or domestically produced items, and then the usual consumer goods or in foods. So that becomes a huge market for businesses all over the world. So how can we sell to this large population? And then we'll go in. India is very close behind as far as population is concerned as well, and that's also developing fairly quickly. But at the same time, with such large populations, we have a lot of kind of issues with environmental issues, traffic congestion issues, and poverty issues. So there are a lot of other issues that have to be concerned with, and we'll get into those issues. But just knowing that Asia is such a large population is something that you have to be considered when you're looking at potential markets in the world to sell your products. Now, this chart just shows the GDP of the countries in Asia. China's ranked #1, and within Asia, and #2 in the world, just behind the United States. Those numbers alone, I guess, is not very meaningful until we put that into more of a context where we are Japan in #2, India is #3, and so on and so forth. That, of course, the bigger economies are the ones that most people are concerned with. But some of the smaller economies are the fastest growing ones. So we'll pay attention to those as well in this class. One of the best ways I have came across to say, well, how do we talk about Asia and how do we divide different parts of Asia? Because Asia is so diverse. You divide them geographically or just by income. It doesn't quite fit properly. So the best one I found is McKinsey. McKinsey Consulting has developed I guess a method of dividing Asia into what's called 4 Asias, 4 categories. And they're based on the different stages of economic development and their comparative advantage. The four groupings they call are advanced Asia, with Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea. Those are the much more advanced economically developed countries. Then we have China, which is including Hong Kong, Macau, mainland China, and Taiwan. Even within that grouping, there are significant differences between all those regions, but they're close enough that we can discuss them as a one grouping. The third grouping is emerging Asia. Those are a lot of the countries that are developing quickly. They integrate very well with each other. There's a lot of intra-regional trade between those countries. There's a lot more industrialization going on, and they'll play probably the biggest part in the next phase of Asia development. And then we have the fourth one, which is Frontier Asia and India. Those are the countries that are probably a little bit further behind as far as economic development, but they're also growing, and we'll also see them coming up, and especially India, because of its very large population, will become a major player in the global supply chain. Okay, here we're going to give a little bit more detail into these groupings, and then we will give an example of each country in each of those groupings to better illustrate what we mean by the different levels of economic development. The advanced Asia, one of the measurements is that they have a high level of per capita GDP, that is between 30,000 to 60,000, and an urbanization rate between 82 to 100%. That the population in these countries have a fairly high income, and most of them are living in cities. Like most people are living in cities and tend to consume a lot more, right? So the key roles they play for the rest of Asia is technology providers. Companies in these economies, such as Japan, Korea, they intend to invest a lot in research and development, and they develop their own technology. They're also capital providers. Usually they're financial centers that the companies in these region or in these countries provide a lot of investment for other countries, especially developing countries that need foreign investment. So a lot of the foreign investment from the developing countries would come from this particular group. And then the third one is the market, because of their high per capita income, that they are basically consumers of products that are produced throughout the rest of Asia. Here, I've selected Singapore as a sample for us to look at of a advanced Asian country. So Singapore is highly developed and has a successful free market economy. It's open, corruption-free environment, stable prices, a high per capita GDP, has very low unemployment. The economy depends heavily on exports, particularly in electronics, petroleum products, chemicals, and so on. One of Singapore's key industries is logistics. Singapore is a huge transshipment point because it is such a small country that it's called city. It's called a city state because it's really just a city that has succeeded, exceedingly well based off its efficient logistics. That the port of Singapore is the second largest port in the world, and so much products go through Singapore. And at the same time with the financial transactions to go with that. So it is really a logistics and financial center for that region of the world. So it is has a plays a part in coordinating a lot of the trade in the region. It is involved in all the different free trade agreements within that region, and like I said, it is a key logistics hub for that part of Asia. The second grouping is China. And because we're going to spend a considerable amount of time later on in this course to really do deep dives into all aspects of China, that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about China here. But when this grouping of China, it also includes Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan. So, there is some differences in these areas. And the important role that China plays is that it is a global trade platform. That we'll get into the intra-regional trade in the next class, but China is really the key to this whole region. It imports a lot of materials and products from other nations in Asia, and also exports a lot of products to Asia. So it's really the hub for Asian economy. Of course, it's a huge market. Right? The Chinese consumption will grow to about 6 trillion by 2030. So it has a very large and growing consumer class. At the same time, China, through its various initiatives, and some of it is government backed and some of it is private, that it has invested a lot into neighboring countries. Okay, some of it is invested in infrastructure, a lot of the businesses that Chinese companies have invested in other parts of Asia. An innovator, China's basically moved up the value chain, where it started as really a world's factory producing products using cheap labor. But in the last number of years, that it has really pushed itself into further up the supply chain and want to do more high-tech products and things like there's all kind of Chinese branded say smartphones or TVs and all type of technology products have been sold out through the world now. So there's a lot of innovation going on, and then a lot of patents are now being issued to Chinese companies. But here I will kind of talk about one part of China, which is Hong Kong. That is very different than mainland China. Hong Kong was really developed because China was not an open economy prior to entering the WTO, that all the trade in and out of China basically went through Hong Kong. Hong Kong was the gateway. That's what really developed Hong Kong as a trading center, as a finance center, and also as a logistics center. Right? So all the products that used to go in and out of China went to part of Hong Kong. And so today, of course, Hong Kong plays a different role as China has opened up. A lot of companies are going directly into Hong Kong, into China, I mean. But Hong Kong still plays an important role in the financial industry, and it has a different level, different way of government. It's called a special administrative region. That means it even though it is part of China, it is governed differently. Has a different currency. So it is in very much how they call it is one country, two set of rules. So China has different rules and also has played a different role in Asia. So that's something that you have to kind of keep an eye on when you understand when you talk about China and different parts of China, and then specifically things like places like Hong Kong. It is very, very different, and it's not the same as mainland China. The third group is emerging Asia, and perhaps this is the most interesting group of countries from a global supply chain perspective. This group is characterized by small economies that are highly connected to each other. It consists of all the ASEAN members. ASEAN is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and we're going to dig deeper into Asia in our one of our following classes. But these all these countries are Asian members except for Singapore. So Singapore is advanced economy, whereas the rest of them, the nations in this area, in this Asian region, is quick developing. Okay, so these countries really are the engine for the next phase of growth in Asia because of, number one, their labor. Economies with a substantial pool of labor because of the high population. You look at the Indonesia, Vietnam. These are countries with significant populations that have much lower wages. There are about half of those in mainland China. So when people used to think about, well, the China grew because of its low-cost labor and all this labor-intensive industries growth. Well, that's changed because the wages in China has been increasing very quickly in the last number of years. Now, these group of emerging Asian nations are really there to take its place as the source for a low-cost labor. These economies are expected to grow about 4 to 5% until 2040. Throughout this course, one of the things is that we will not talk about, or we want to take into account the impact of COVID on the economies. We'll use data from prior to COVID. The reason for that is because the impact of COVID is still unknown. We don't know exactly what's going to happen to that. So it's hard to use that data as a way to indicate where these countries are going. So using data prior to COVID, it's much more reliable. And cultural diversity. Again, this group is the most culturally diverse in Asia, with 641 million people speaking 600 different languages. So it is a very complicated area to deal with, and that's why we're going to talk about this more in detail in the following classes. And one of the countries that we're going to focus on is Vietnam. Vietnam has gone through significant changes recently. That is, it's changed from what you call a centrally planned economy to more of a market economy. That it was, primarily an agrarian economy. There was basic agricultural. Major exports were rice and grain, to much more industrialized economy, where it's focusing on manufacturing. And that's where we're seeing the economic growth, is because of the increase in manufacturing. Vietnam has a fairly young population, a stable political system. So that is what is key for the manufacturing sector, right? We need to have a large workforce. So that's what a lot of companies like about Vietnam. But at the same time, because of his history as being an agricultural industry, a lot of the country's infrastructure is not in place to meet the needs of foreign manufacturers. Everything from the ports to the roads to the workforce. Even though we have a large workforce, a lot of them are not trained or not technically trained to be working in the manufacturing industry. So some challenges exist for Vietnam, and we'll do a deeper dive into Vietnam in one of the other classes. The last group is Frontier Asia and India. One of the difference between this particular group of nations is that they're not very well connected to the other parts of Asia. With the Asian countries, they're very connected as far as trade and finances and so on, whereas this group is more connected with other parts of the world and not so much to Asia. That they're less focused on manufacturing historically, but going forward, I think they're also interested in developing the manufacturing industry. India is very focused on the service industry. So about 36% of the global business process outsourcing is gone to India. A lot of the IT support, right, a lot of the call centers. Those are the industries that has a lot of been offshore to India. I guess one of India's big advantages is it is an English-speaking population, so that helps it integrate better into the rest of the global economy. And so the GDP growth of this area is also very, very fast because it is probably the least developed economies of the groups. It also seems to be the fastest developing group. So India is one of the probably the key country in this region, and is because of its large population. I guess it has almost 1.4 billion people, the second largest in the world. That has a lot of potential to become a major market, a consumer market for other countries. So that is where the area, what is very interesting from India, because of that large market, is also going to support a domestic market. So a lot of domestic manufacturers that in India can develop its products for Indians instead of worrying about exporting. So the dynamics are very different, and we will focus a bit more on India's integration into the global economy and the global supply chain, but it is different strategy than a country like Vietnam because it was a very large domestic population. And as we talked about, the emerging developing Asia is going to be growing rapidly in the foreseeable future. Okay, so where the more mature economies, where it's like Singapore, Korea, Japan, where Japan is pretty much stagnant, they're experiencing much slower growth. The emerging nations within Asia are expected to grow very quickly for the foreseeable future. The World Economic Forum does an assessment every year, and they come up with a global competitiveness report where they measure each country based on 12 different pillars. They call it basically 12 characteristics of the country. Everything from education to corruption to infrastructure and things like that, to assess how competitive is this economy. And in 2019 was the first year that Singapore surpassed United States, and it's to be number one. And along in the list of top 10, you have Singapore, Hong Kong in number 3, Japan in number 6. So with 3 of the top 10 countries on the list, and so it shows that how well developed Asia is as far as competitiveness, business competitiveness. But at the same time, you look at the bottom of the list, also consists of a lot of the countries in Asia. So there's a huge gap between the countries in Asia. Again, that just emphasizes the diversity within Asia. Another important measure, especially for supply chain managers, is the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index. And that's done every few years. And it measures the countries on 6 different measures on how well its customs handles, how well does it do international shipments, the timeliness, whether it has tracking, tracing, et cetera. So it's focused on the logistics performance. The rankings are important because it shows that it's a comparison that is very useful if you're looking at how Japan is number 1 and Singapore is number 2, Hong Kong number 3. That is they're very advanced as far as logistics performance is concerned. And then you have the next grouping where you have China, Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and so on, working down the list. And then you see what the bottom of the top 12 is India, Indonesia, Philippines, that they're less developed. So their logistics performance is not up to the standard of more developed, more advanced countries. So the index number itself is not perhaps very meaningful, but it is very meaningful when you look at how they compare to other countries. So if you were to do business with a company in Japan or Singapore, you can be pretty sure that the logistics and the import-export processes are very efficient. But if you were dealing perhaps with the Philippines or Indonesia, you would expect that you will have some challenges to deal with. So one of the important parts of the score is infrastructure, and especially we're looking at developing countries. That's perhaps the biggest challenge, is having the infrastructure for moving a lot of cargo. And because 80% of world trade is done by sea using ocean containers, that the ports are a good indication of the volume of trade and the sophistication of the country. So in this chart is showing the world's busiest ports. You'll see that the number 1 is Shanghai. Top in the world is Shanghai port in China. Number 2 is Singapore, and then Shenzhen in China, Ningbo, Zhoushan in China, then Busan in South Korea, Hong Kong, China again, Guangzhou, Qingdao, so on. The interesting, very obvious part of this is that most of them are in China. Okay, the volume of containers that's going through Chinese ports is tremendous, and this is what very good example here is Europe's top 3 busiest ports, and that includes Rotterdam in Netherlands, Antwerp, and Hamburg combined does not move as much cargo as Shanghai. So it shows that the volume of trade coming out of China, particularly Shanghai, and that infrastructure in China for global trade, or even in Asia for global trade, is very well developed in those particular countries, China, Singapore, South Korea, and so on. With the growth of e-commerce, air cargo is becoming more and more important. So we're looking at the world's 20 busiest air cargo hubs. And number 1 is Hong Kong in Asia Pacific. Number 3 is Shanghai in Asia Pacific. Number 4 is Incheon in Korea in Asia Pacific, and so on. A lot of the, I believe there's 7 of the top 20 is in Asia Pacific region. A little bit of difference though, air cargo, when you look at air cargo, is that a lot of air cargo hubs are also passenger hubs, because a lot of air cargo is carried in the belly or under the passengers on passenger flights. So that's about 50% of cargo is carried that way. So the areas that have a lot of passengers going through tend to be also where they have a lot of air cargo going through. And perhaps the only difference, is like Memphis in the United States, where it's head of for FedEx at the hub, so also and the Louisville, Kentucky, which is the hub for UPS. All the other ones are also important passenger hubs. So, we mentioned that there's a lot of growth expected for Asia. So what are the key drivers of this growth? So according to a DHL research called Demystifying Asian Pacific Trade Trends, it identified 3 key drivers. Number 1 is emerging manufacturing hubs. The second, increasing domestic consumption. And the third, growing e-commerce. And we'll talk a bit about each one of those. Emerging manufacturing hubs. Labor-intensive manufacturing for export was a major engine for China's growth. That's how it all started for China. When it opened up, it had this huge population that we can build huge factories and build things, particularly labor-intensive manufacturing in huge volume and exported all over the world. And because it was low cost, a lot of the manufacturing from other countries were offshored to China, and so it became the world's factory. However, with economic growth in China, that the labor cost has been going up significantly, and every double digits every year. It's not just the labor cost, the land costs, energy costs. It really has been rising very quickly in China. So a lot of companies that have labor-intensive manufacturing are starting to move their manufacturing out of China to a lower cost location. So where are they going to go? Most of the manufacturing is going to stay in the Asia Pacific region. And the projection is that countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, India will be the destination for a lot of these businesses that are going to be moving away from China. And industries that are most likely to be affected are the automotive parts, electronics, metal products, plastics, clothing, apparel, shoes, and things like that. And they're going to adopt what is called the China Plus One strategy, and we'll explain it more a little bit later. But it means because China is also become a very important market itself. A lot of companies that we've talked to, they want to stay in China or keep some manufacturing in China, even though the cost is higher, to meet the needs of Chinese consumers. And you'll see a lot of that, especially in the automotive industry, where setting up a factory is very, very expensive. That the place they want to be is China, because that's where the consumers are, even though it may cost them more. And so that's called the China Plus One strategy. So a lot of the, let's say the other countries are expected to be benefiting from this offshoring of Chinese manufacturing to other countries. Growing e-commerce. Even though e-commerce is growing all over the world, of course, but Asia Pacific is the largest because of the large population, also the fastest growing business to consumer B2C e-commerce market, and it's driven by two things: increased consumption and urbanization. Increased consumption, the amount of consumption is basically tied to number one thing is how much income they have, right? As the people have more income, they will buy more. That's what we're seeing is the growth of GDP for a lot of these countries. They're increasing fairly rapidly, so people's income are also increasing at the same time. The second factor is urbanization. Is that when people are living in the country in more of a farming environment, they move into the cities, they tend to consume more. They'll buy more things instead of being more self-reliant. Things like food, clothing, and so on, and TVs, refrigerators, furniture. They'll consume more when they're in an urban environment. And there's a lot of urbanization going on in Asia. Look at China. China has the largest urbanization project going on right now in human history, where they move people from the countryside into these mega cities. But the same thing is happening in places like India, Vietnam, and so on. So more and more people are moving into living in the cities and becoming consumers. The other factor is access to internet. Right? Internet penetration is going up higher and higher in these countries, so that they can purchase things online, and perhaps purchase things that they couldn't before, where they were living in the countryside. They didn't have access to these markets. One other item is that on a lot of these developing countries, they did not have a well-developed retail industry, right? Not perhaps like in North America, where you have these large shopping malls that you can go in and buy things. That particular system wasn't very well developed in Asia Pacific. That the consumers now having access to be able to buy things online have kind of skipped that. Instead of going to the brick and mortar, you just buy things online, have access to all the different variety of things at competitive prices. So this is a big change, and allowing them to grow e-commerce to go faster than in more developed nations, which still have the brick and mortars to deal with, and they can go directly to online. So e-commerce is a real growth engine in the developing economies, but at the same time, we understand that the biggest challenge in e-commerce is fulfillment. How do you get the products to the consumers, especially if the infrastructure is not there? So that's a challenge that all these economies are dealing with. Increased domestic consumption. We were talking about increasing income in the last 20 years. Global poverty has dropped dramatically. So about 1.2 billion people becoming consumers. We're expecting more and more that to continue to happen as these economies develop. More people become consumers, and a lot when they're buying things, when they're earlier in their development stages, they tend to be consuming domestic products versus imported product. just in Asia alone, the Asian middle class would be about 3 billion strong. So that's why this region is one of the most important markets for international companies. This graphic shows that the expected change between 2015 to 2030, that about 50% of the global consumption growth will come from the Asia Pacific region, with China leading the way. And one particular class of products, luxury goods, is really demonstrates the impact of the Asian consumer on the industry, because the Asian consumer tend to buy luxury products, and that the Asian consumers grow as the Asian consumer market grows, or the size of the Asian consumer grows, is really driving the consumer market. That looking at things like luxury handbags and brand name clothing and things like that, that a small group of consumers in 2018, say less than 30 million consumers, account for over 1/3 of global spending on luxury goods. So this is one sector that they will pay particular attention to the Asian consumer, that they tend to be over consumers or super consumers in this particular sector, is luxury goods. So businesses in this area have to find a way how they can access these consumers and get their products into their hands. Here's a short video from McKinsey to talk about the future of Asia and what's shaping the Asia for the next 10 years. It's about 2 minutes long, but it's a very good video.
There are three main trends in Asian trade that I would like to highlight. The first one is Asian economies are domesticating. They are consuming more of what they produce, and they are building domestic supply chains, reducing their exposure to trade. And today India is following in the footsteps of China on this. Secondly, trade is gradually shifting between Asian countries. Increasing labor costs drive China to higher value-added exports, and emerging countries like Vietnam and Cambodia are frontrunners in picking up China's share in the export of labor-intensive goods. And thirdly, emerging Asia needs to improve its competitiveness versus the developed world. Asian economies have considerable productivity and quality gaps compared to the developed world. But at the same time, the bar is rising. Customers in the West are asking for shorter lead times and more tailored products. To respond to these trends, executives in Asia should first of all align their manufacturing footprints and supply chains with the evolving trade flows in both Asia and also the rest of the world. Secondly, they should invest in capability building so that their employees are able to quickly increase global competitiveness through improved productivity, quality, and lead times. And thirdly, they should be leaders in running digital and analytics transformations to put their business improvement on steroids, using new tools, new ways of working, and through that, close the gap with the developed world faster.
Okay, just to recap, the three most disruptive, powerful forces shaping trade and manufacturing is number one, Asian economies are domesticating. So what does that mean? That means they're changing or shifting from an export economy to a more domestic economy. You see this in China. What's been happening a number of years in China is it's growing consumer class can support the output of the businesses as they consume more and they're buying more locally made goods, that the companies can focus on the domestic market versus just focusing on exporting market. And they also said that India is following China's footsteps in this. Now, this is only possible if you have a large domestic market. If you have a small domestic market that cannot support your outputs, then domesticating would not be a major focus for you, that you're still focused on exporting your outputs. So for some of the emerging countries in Asia, this is where they'd be focusing on exporting their products to the Western markets or other Asian markets, and not so much on producing goods for the domestic market. So, but for the larger countries, they have the advantage of, let's focus on the domestic market and perhaps then go to an export economy. The second one is trade shifting between Asian countries. We've already talked about that. As the cost increase in China, they're shifting to the other Asian economies to produce the low-cost labor. The third one is Asia needs to improve its competitiveness, and we'll talk about specifically on the logistics perspective. There's some of the infrastructures that is needed to be developed in these countries to become more competitive. So as supply chain manager, we're concerned with certain things, factors in Asia that are becoming challenges for us. The first one is the rapid expansion of Asia Pacific footprint. Fast growth is the fastest growing region in the world, but it also creates a lot of uncertainty when things are changing so fast that it's hard to project the rate of growth and where it's going to go, because the dynamics within these countries are always changing. The different tariffs, different government policies, that all impacts the development. The second one is increasing product complexity. As we talked about, within just Asia itself, the number of different languages that are spoken, the different cultures, that in order to meet their needs, you would need a lot more customization of your products to meet the consumer's needs. Things like packaging, labeling, to size of it, or even flavors of its food and things like that. That would complicate the supply chain. The third item is increasing manufacturing logistics costs. And even though we are talking about low-cost labor in a lot of these countries, but their wages are increasing as well. This is a cycle that is repeated over and over again as the economies grow. Wages increase, right? This is something that happens, but if there are a lot of changes that are happening or things that are changing very quickly, there's something that is very challenging for supply chain managers, how to manage your manufacturing footprint to take advantage of the labor cost. The fourth item, forecasting and planning, becomes more challenging. Again, with the complexity and the fast changes, forecasting is very, very difficult. Fifth item, digitization, raising bar on supply chain performance. With the online sales, the e-commerce boom, it is very challenging for supply chain managers is how to fulfill those orders in a timely and cost-effective manner. with the vast differences between the different nations. Trying to get a standard or a performance standard is very difficult. And with the organization complexity, talent shortage, limiting growth. As your country, your company expands to all these different countries, not only is it more complex, you're dealing again with different languages, different cultures, which affects the workplace as well. So that's going to make your structure a lot more complicated. And then the talent gap. We call the talent gap is that, as we talked earlier before, that some of these countries may not have the education system in place. They do not have the training of people work experience or a particular skill set that you need, which impacts the development of your supply chain. And we'll talk about it later, where some of these manufacturers trying to go into countries, but they don't have the suppliers they need for the materials or the components they need because they simply supply base don't exist. And supply base includes, do you have the needed workers, the skilled workers that you need to run these manufacturing processes. So in conclusion, we say this is Asia-centric. We expect Asia to grow the fastest and be a dominant factor in the world. So it's vital for business to look for growth and new market opportunities to understand this region and its dynamics. Businesses in Asia and around the world need to consider how to make their businesses relevant to the world's largest regional economy. So if you have substantial presence in Asia, you need to continuously refresh your strategy, review your strategy to make sure it's still relevant in this dynamic environment. It's a very fast changing environment. But if you do not have much presence in Asia, you need to think about how you can be involved with Asia, whether it's a source of your products or as a market for your products. Many companies have tried and failed to gain meaningful foothold in the region and forced to retreat. And there's numerous examples of multinationals or even fairly large multinationals try to enter these markets and have failed. So because they need to understand that what works in one country does not necessarily work in another country. Because a lot of multinationals, they try to standardize and have one particular strategy or one way of operating, one model, and they try to replicate that everywhere in the world. And what they find is that it doesn't work, that you really need to localize your business models to fit that particular market. And even within Asia, you can't say, this is my Asian model. That doesn't work as well as what works in one country may not work in another country. So they really need to evaluate the market, the country they're in, and develop meaningful strategies. So this is the end of this class. The second class in the series, we're going to cover more about Asia-Pacific intra-regional trades. Thank you very much.